Hello, everybody. Welcome to the webcast today. Now more than ever, with the COVID-19 crisis, people are looking for effective ways to work more remotely. One of the first thoughts that come to mind is the cloud. So, can it help in some way to allow us to collaborate and design online in a more remote way? So, we're going to talk today about the technologies available, some of the benefits and challenges with those, and some of the services that Javelin can provide to help you get there. So before we dive in, let's start with a few introductions. My name is Scott Lidgy. I'm the National Technical Solutions Manager here at Javelin Technologies. And today with me, I have Brian Moffett, who is our IT manager for all of our IT needs for our company across Canada. Also, we've got Andrew Lidstone, who is one of our strategic technical account managers. Andrew is dealing with some of our largest customers and has been a big part of bringing some of those customers to the cloud and been working with them very tightly and seeing some great successes. So I've invited them out to be part of this webcast. A little bit of housekeeping. In the go-to webinar panel, you'll find a question for sections. Sorry, a section for questions. Let's say that again. So feel free to enter any of your questions throughout the webinar. And at the end, we're definitely going to save some time for the three of us to answer as many of those as we can. If we don't get to all of them, we'll definitely reach out to you directly through email and get all those questions you have answered. So the agenda for today is we're going to talk about what is the cloud. And then we'll dig in a little tighter into desktop virtualization, where we're going to be working in our SOLIDWORKS potentially in a cloud environment. And lastly, how can Javelin help you guys get there? So first, what is the cloud? There's a lot of confusion around this, but the cloud is becoming a very hot topic for our clients. People are becoming much more comfortable and accepting of maintaining their data and working in the cloud. I think this is just because we're being exposed to it much more. We're gaining confidence in the security aspect of putting our data outside of our office walls. The interest is growing so much, almost exponentially, I'd say. I'm getting requests for meetings and just on information about what is it all about, what does it take to get me there, what are the options and benefits of going to a cloud-based environment. So let's start putting this in perspective. Like, what is the cloud? Really, it's a global network of servers connected into one ecosystem. I think Ryan put it best to me the other day where he said, now, it's really as simple as it's someone else's computer that you're using. It's there to store and manage data, all sorts of file types. We can put it up there. It's delivering our content, and that's where I guess many of us are more familiar with it. Things like Netflix, Spotify for our music. It's delivering us our email and managing it or maintaining it for us, things like Gmail. It even manages our money, our banking systems, all of our finances are up there in the cloud. I think a lot of us don't even realize how connected and dependent we are on the cloud today. So let's dig a little deeper yet again. The cloud could be set up in a few different ways. One is a private environment, the other is a public. If we dig in a little deeper on private side of things, it could be an internal or hosted environment. Internal meaning you're buying the systems, you're buying and setting up the hardware, the buildings themselves, the cooling environment for it. The whole infrastructure is owned by you. Hosted is where we can bring in third-party people. One name that comes to mind is Epigrid, where you can pay these companies to manage the system for you, and it's on their hardware. But keeping in mind that it is your hardware. For example, your server is dedicated to you. If we move over to the public side of things, this is using a shared resource. So your virtual server may actually be sitting on the same hard drive as someone else's server. So, some familiar names in the industry are things like AWS and Azure. So if we dig deeper into these, both the hosted and the public side of things, we're going to get Andrew and Ryan to actually jump in here and start talking about how these companies provide these types of services.
Great. So the first layer here, public or private, is an offering called an infrastructure as a service. And the infrastructure as a service is the base layer that everything else builds on top of. So things like virtual networks and VPNs, virtual servers, SQL databases, and that type of thing would be considered an infrastructure as a service.
So probably what you'd be most used to as a service name for this would be AWS EC2 servers. And that's kind of the gateway for a lot of companies where they've started with cloud hosting. This is where you would bring up a Windows server as an EC2 server, and then you would install your SOLIDWORKS PDM, SOLIDWORKS Manage, your Solid Network License Manager. And also this would be where, if you're using PDM or Manage, you would have your SQL server installed.
All right, and the next level up, we get the desktop as a service. So when you provision an EC2 server or an Azure instance, you're basically creating a computer. And what you can do with that is allow people to use a remote desktop connection and log on to that computer and use it like they was just right in front of them, or the local computer in the office.
So this would be a situation where this is what the clients are connecting to. So with AWS, this would be workspaces. With Azure, they call it Windows Virtual Desktop. But basically, it's a full computer. So this is where your actual programs will be installed, SOLIDWORKS, as well as any other tools that the users are going to need to do their work.
And the last step, we got software as a service. So these are software offerings that exist in the cloud and can be used by many, many people. When you think of software as a service, you think of things like Gmail or Office 365 or Dropbox or the 3D experience. I think I took that from you. Sorry about that, Andrew. I just can't stop. Okay. Yeah, sure, I will, absolutely. So with the cloud technologies that you have a sort of shift from what you're responsible for to what the cloud provider is responsible for. So if you look at their chart here, you can see pretty clearly what's laid out and what is your responsibility to manage and what's the vendor's responsibility. So when you have an on-premise solution, you've got that server in your office. You have to manage the power, you have to manage the cooling, the maintenance on the systems, and the physical security to the building and to the server room. You have to manage everything. When we move over to the infrastructure as a service, a lot of that workload is taken away. So you don't have to manage the power, you don't have to manage security, you don't have to manage cooling, you don't have to manage the maintenance on the server hardware itself. But you do still have to log into your systems and patch them and update them, keep them updated. You have to update your applications and manage those situations as well. Andrew, you want to take it away?
Sure. So basically from there on, like when you're looking at some of the other offerings, you're going to be going in with basically, as was already mentioned, somebody else's computer that you're controlling. So you're going to be looking at installing all those applications as if you were just remoting into a regular server. So for things like, as we mentioned already, PDM or SOLIDWORKS licensing, you're just going to be controlling that, managing that, just like you would in any other either virtualized on-premises virtual server or a physical server itself. When it comes to the desktop applications, it's the exact same thing. The biggest benefit, though, is because everything's virtualized, is it's much easier to control and scale and basically bring up additional instances as needed for more users.
Or just change the size of the system that you're using, shutting it down and increasing the RAM by 20 times. You can do something like that.
So that's great. So if we start to talk about some of the maybe challenges and benefits of moving to the cloud, things you need to be thinking about. I think we'll all just chime in on some of these, but let's start on the challenges side. I think the first thing is support. You know, you have to keep that in mind, especially when you're dealing with SOLIDWORKS products, at least for today, the SOLIDWORKS platform. And that's because support, you know, we cannot support every variation that is in the cloud. I mean, we have a lot of different hardware there. So although it's not officially supported to be going, some of these things to go to the cloud, SOLIDWORKS and Javelin especially is going to do our best to make sure that any issues that might arise, we're going to do our best to support that. Connection and bandwidth. You know, these are big concerns because you are going to be online all the time. So depending on where you're located, you might have bandwidth restrictions that might decrease the performance when going through a cloud service. Guys, you can jump in on any of these if you'd like. Maybe the cost would be a good one to touch on.
Yeah, the one thing that comes up often when I'm looking for a cloud solution for a customer is where they need to have their data. So in for some cloud vendors, you don't really get to choose where to put your data. In AWS and Azure, you can choose to store your data and all of your data in Canada or US or any region worldwide. But some of our customers need to have their data housed within Canada due to regulations and restrictions for government work or other type things. So with Azure and AWS, you can tell everything, or you can set everything to be in Canada and not leave Canada. So that lets you to be compliant with some of your customers as well. Another challenge may be usage costs. So for an example, you know, if I had to make a really heavy duty SolidWorks type system to manage and to deal with some large assemblies or something, you know, that system runs and it gets billed by the minute. And if you let that thing run for an entire month, you know, without shutting it down or anything, it can cost you thousands of dollars easily. So you really have to be aware of the cost per hour or per minute of the systems that you're creating.
And one other one that we've got there is regarding SOLIDWORKS licensing. So that's kind of a requirement there that only network licenses can be used on a cloud installation. So the standalone license cannot be used in this environment. And as far as the Solid Network License Manager that has to be used, it must be 2019 SP2 and newer. So very small requirement. That's an easy one to address. But the big thing to remember is it's the network licenses that can be used in these environments.
I guess that kind of jumps into some of the benefits as well. I mean, being in the cloud, sometimes that having that license manager in the cloud makes it more accessible, I think, to users. Some of the other benefits is that because it's in the cloud now, this data is accessible from pretty much anywhere. You're not restricted as much with devices and locations and so on. Of course, also being off-premise, off-site there, you've got natural disaster and crisis redundancy. I mean, you're going to have backups on backups almost. I'm sure Brian can attest to some of that a little better than I can. You guys wanted to add any more to the benefits?
Yeah, sure. The yeah, definitely the insulation from single point of failure, like you know, if a data center catches on fire or something. Typically, there's multiple sites that are replicating your data, and that's not something that you really have control over. But if something does fail, the vendor is the one that switches it over to something that is working. So that's a good benefit in that you don't have to have the same type of redundancy that you would if it was an on-premise system. The total cost of ownership can be reduced in a cloud situation where you have, if you have a large data center, you may not want to pay for the power and the cooling and the rent for the building and all the services that go along with it. You may just want to have that rolled into your operating costs. So the costing method moves from a capital expense to an operating expense when you're dealing in a cloud environment. And that can save you a lot of money over the long run with maintenance and security and that kind of thing.
That's awesome. Andrew, I think you've got a good customer story you can talk to through some of the benefits and challenges and some of the objectives they had of getting them to be more cloud-based.
Yeah, so we had a particular customer that came to us probably about 18 months ago, looking into switching as phase one, switching their SOLIDWORKS PDM to be cloud hosted on Amazon EC2 servers. So it was a very interesting project. So their particular situation was that they had grown substantially and had a number of offices all over the world that were now working together. So it didn't really make a lot of sense to have one central location that would have the primary PDM database as well as archives. Instead, they wanted a cloud hosted solution. So they wanted to improve performance. One office had great performance, everybody else wasn't so great. The other thing, they had a mandate from their corporate IT to reduce server management costs. And this had been identified as an excellent way to do that. And further, they were looking to really centralize their data and make sure that they had really good options for disaster recovery. So we made the move, brought in both the database servers and centralized archive servers on the AWS instances. Now, they also put archive servers in each of the office, so they were able to optimize their performance all around. And what was really impressive to see was the improvement in performance for those users that especially were in Asia, Europe, places like that, where now they were able to use the vault effectively. Before they had such high latency, it just wasn't an effective tool. But now they were able to work properly. It was still not as fast as having the database server right there in the office, but it was substantially faster. Now, on the other side, the users who used to have the SQL server sitting in their same office were a bit slower, but they felt that it wasn't actually a big trade-off. It was still quite responsive. They didn't see an enormous change for them. So it was well received all around for the users. Another really big benefit that we found was as their vault usage grew and more of their older vaults were migrated into a central vault, they actually needed to scale up the server. That was phenomenally easy. It was actually just everything was set up, and as Ryan mentioned before, it was one night. In fact, it was even less than that. It was probably just a few minutes by the time everything was set up for the upgrade, taken down, brought back up, everything was ready to go. So we found that was a huge time and cost savings.
That's awesome. It's a great story. So that's a little bit of kind of a high level of the server side of things. This one we're going to dig in a little deeper on desktop as a service. So I'm going to pass that back over to Andrew to dig a little deeper there.
Okay. So again, desktop as a service is kind of just one of the flavors of virtualization on the cloud. So it's basically the idea of giving you a full Windows desktop experience, or could be other operating systems, but for SOLIDWORKS, we're going to talk about Windows. So again, AWS, Azure, and even private cloud hosting like Epigrid, they offer these as services. So I think, there we go.
Yeah, so some of the challenges and benefits we have, or you should think about going this route. Again, it's the support side of things, similar to what we were talking about before. The connection bandwidth, again, the same. SOLIDWORKS licensing. Again, this is especially important with things like the difference between SOLIDWORKS PDM and SOLIDWORKS. As many of you should already know, products like PDM are global licensing, so they can be accessed from anywhere in the world, where SOLIDWORKS is still regional licensing. So how that is set up is somewhat important to make sure you're in line with the license agreements. A lot of benefits to going this route. Obviously, easily deployed, as you heard Ryan and Andrew mentioned, how quick it is to spin these things up and create more. The scalability, be able to down them or add more RAM to systems that need it. The data security, again, being able to know that we can actually share these desktops in a way where we can control who can see those serial numbers and how they access it. So we're protecting our assets in our company much better. Any more you guys want to jump in on those ones?
Yeah, so the payment model is typically a pay-as-you-go kind of a situation. So you only pay for the amount of compute that you use. For example, the example that I used earlier with the big computer crunching a big task. Once that task is complete, you can shut down that system and you don't keep paying for it. You stop billing. If you were to go out and buy a machine to do large assemblies, it's going to cost you a few $1,000s. You may only use it for a handful of hours a month, and then all that other investment that you put into it is kind of wasted. There's more advantages there too, because you can decide to pay for a year or 2 years of this system to be run 24/7, and the vendors generally give a discount for that. So 25%, 40%, sometimes even 50%, depending on what type of system and how long you want to reserve that system for. So we find a lot of benefits in that costing model, especially when you're doing the workloads that CAD users generally do. It's a lot of compute and then nothing, and then a lot of compute and then nothing. So you can really minimize your bills by managing those things. And we can even set up automation so that when that system is idle for a certain amount of time, it just shuts itself off. So you really have to worry about it.
Cool.
I think another big thing to keep in mind in that scenario too is that performance when your client is sitting in the same data center as your server, the connectivity there is just incredible. So if you're in a SOLIDWORKS PDM environment, this is going to be very, very fast. In the situation we're in right now, where many are working from home, perhaps remotely connecting through a VPN, probably seeing a lot of performance issues. But in this scenario, where we have a virtual server and a virtual desktop, that connection is solid. It's as good as it could be, really. So the performance just cannot be highlighted enough in this scenario.
Very good. I think you have more to describe, again, another good customer success story, again, with the challenges, benefits, and obviously the objectives. Why did they want to go to this desktop as a service way of working?
Yeah, so this was it's actually the same customer. So we do have others, but this was a great one to share. But they had, as phase 2, they were also looking at reducing their physical workstations. They wanted to look at, can they use virtual cloud hosted workstations, and they were looking at AWS workspaces to replace their CAD workstations. So that was the goal after they had moved their servers. So one of the reasons we really like this story is because of how carefully they examined this. So they determined that cloud-hosted workstations just were not a fit for them at the moment. So it was not cost-effective when they had all their users in the office. They already had the infrastructure in the office. They already had IT staff. So this wasn't going to save them money. So they decided not to go ahead and get rid of all their physical workstations and move to that. However, they found it was an excellent solution for something else, which was they frequently used contractors. And so they didn't want to give these contractors a laptop or give them their licenses of SOLIDWORKS. They wanted to have control. So they started using these Amazon workspaces for contractors to be able to use. And they could have them on demand whenever they needed those contractors to be supplied with equipment. Now, come forward to last month, when they had this sudden requirement that users could no longer come to the office. Well, they had this ready-made solution, and that's what they went with. And it was very fast. They were able to get everybody that needed one of these instances ready in no time at all, so that there was zero interruption to their work.
Yeah, it was a great story. I think the where they found it expensive, we weren't talking about 5 or 10 users. I think we were up towards hundreds of users, if I'm not mistaken, right, Andrew?
Yeah, I believe it was somewhere around 700.
Oh my God. So yeah, that's a lot of users to have up on the cloud at once, but they definitely found the benefit and brought it back in play under these situations. So it was great. So moving into how can we help? Javelin, is working hard on getting our customers the options that they're looking for. So, I'm going to kick it off with, we sort of have 3 major steps in getting you there, with a 4th, which is a kind of sort of catch-all. But the first phase is our Javelin Cloud mentoring. Mentoring is where we evaluate and advise you guys on how best to work in the cloud. I'm going to pass this actually over to Ryan to fill in some of the details here.
Right, so we have a look at your existing infrastructure and software and hardware, bandwidth, and the workloads that you're looking to accomplish. And we can match that to different offerings that are in the different cloud platforms. And we can recommend things that may help you speed up some workloads or release you from some roadblocks that keep you from working remotely or doing the big workloads that you need to do once in a while and that kind of thing.
From there, the next phase is actually setting up or configuring the system. So through our Javelin Cloud Network configuration, we help you get things set up. I don't think there's much more to say there, is there, Ryan?
Yeah, well, just a little bit of basic knowledge there is that, using a public cloud, you can connect to it over the internet, and really ideally what you want to do is restrict that access to a physical location or use some sort of a VPN technology to connect into there. One great advantage of using a VPN is you can extend your own network, your office network, or even your laptop that you're sitting in front of into the cloud so that all of the resources that you have in the cloud appear local to your system. So for the example of a PDM solution, if you had your PDM server in the cloud, you can connect your office through a VPN to the cloud, and then all of your Vault views and checking in, checking out files happen exactly the same way as it would if the server, that PDM server, was on site in your office. And the same goes for remote people at home, like you and me and everybody else right now. You connect to the cloud over your VPN, either to your office or directly to the cloud, and then you can check in and out files just like you would if you're in the office.
And then next phase to that is, Brian mentioned, a big piece of our solutions that we want to get to the cloud is our PDM, our data management system. So there's going to be one of 2 things there. We're going to be helping you implement SOLIDWORKS PDM if you're a first-time implementer for SOLIDWORKS PDM, or we're going to take your existing implementation from your local servers and migrate that up to the cloud. Beyond that, we have a bunch of additional cloud services. Ryan, can you maybe mention a couple of those extras that we can also provide?
Right. So we're looking to help people manage their some of their IT services in the cloud too. So a lot of places have PDM, but they don't have a PDM admin. They don't have somebody to go in there and add or remove users or help update cards or change workflows and things like that. We can certainly help you with that as well. For companies that need a bit of like what Andrew was speaking of, with the contractors needing some simple systems to get them going, we can certainly get those systems up and running and set up for you. and we can basically hand you the keys to the car, and then you can log in and do some work. We also will go through and consult with your different business processes to see if any of those can be optimized or pushed into the cloud so that there's better availability for your remote workers.
So if you guys are looking for more information on these services, they are on our website. You can just do a Google search even on Javelin Technologies Cloud, and you'll come to our services page to give you more detailed info on these products. So one more thing I want to add on, again, with what we're dealing with today with COVID-19, our tech team has been busy at work putting a lot of more blogs on our site. So again, hit our blog site on javelin-tech.com/blog. 3 of the top ones for right now is just to help you guys figure out how to work from home in these times. First one is remote, working with SOLIDWORKS from home through this shutdown. And here we're going to be, how to best access the licenses remotely to your office. This is done through activation, transfers, or the newer online licensing, or how to access the solid network licensing through a VPN. The other one is how can I work remotely during COVID-19? With the isolation or quarantine response, this is another write-up about working remotely with the cloud options that you have today, and digging a little deeper there. And the last one is how do you access PDM? So how do you access that vault when it's not in the cloud yet? There are ways to do it, not quite as quick as probably what our customers that are seeing in the cloud environment, but there are still ways to do that. And our technical team have given you some best practices on how to get the best performance out of that connection. And so with that, that's bringing us to the end of our session today. We've covered a lot of information. Be sure to reach out to us by giving us a call or emailing us. If you need more information on what it's all about, the options you have, and asking us more about the services we have to offer. So with that, we'll stick around for a few more questions. If we take a look.
Looks like there's a few questions in there.
Yeah. Feel free to jump in on them, guys. I'm just getting myself set up here.
Andrew, there's a question from Aaron about how they did the DB server for I think that was Amazon, right? Do you know, did they use RDS, or did they use RDS and then go back to SQL? I don't remember how that went.
That's exactly it. So they started with RDS, and actually just they've actually migrated a number of legacy vaults. So the first one went in as RDS, and from that point on, it all went to an actual installation of SQL standard. RDS has certain limitations that do not work well with PDM. It just makes management of PDM exceptionally difficult. So even though RDS is amazing and it does eliminate a lot of SQL management, it makes the other side of things a lot more challenging. So it was determined that was easier to go to a standard, or I should say an SQL standard installation on Windows as opposed to using the RDS.
Another question there about the archive makes sense. I guess people are questioning how easy is it to get the database side of SOLIDWORKS PDM into the cloud.
So with that, it's really what you're doing is you're bringing up just a Windows server and installing SQL standard on it. So it really acts a lot like a virtual server, like you would have on premises. So it's the same process. You're going to go in and you're going to just restore your database into that environment. The biggest thing to keep in mind when it comes to the SQL is when it comes to the licensing. So previously, SOLIDWORKS PDM would come with a license of SQL standard 2014 that was runtime restricted, and it does not have software assurance with it, which means it cannot be installed in a cloud environment. So you have to have a version of SQL that has software assurance to use it in this environment. Now, if you already have that, great. If not, one of the benefits with both Azure and AWS is that you can bundle it with your monthly fee. So it's actually a really cost-effective way to get that latest version of SQL and be able to benefit from some of the improvements in performance that come from that.
Hey Ryan, a good question here, because we did actually talk a lot about AWS, and I think we used a lot of AWS logos in our presentation.
Yep.
But how about Azure?
Yeah, so I've deployed PDM servers in Azure as well, connected them to offices and things like that. The two platforms are very, very similar in terms of features and functions and supported services, and there's the only advantages really come from if you're an existing Microsoft customer, if you're already using Azure AD, Office 365 and that kind of thing, you can get credits for some of the usage there. I prefer AWS just because for me it's easier to deal with. There's less sort of Windows 10 GUI kind of stuff and more nerdy IT stuff like I like. But that's just a personal preference. I mean, speed-wise, they're really, really similar. They run on very robust networks. The VPNs are very solid and stable and quick. You know, and they're always one-upping each other on price. So you may one week see Azure as $5 cheaper a month than AWS, but you're going to get the same products, you're going to get the same features and functions, and you're going to get a really similar price. So at the end of the day, it just kind of comes down to you know, who's dealing with the back end of it and what they prefer, or if you have, you know, certain discounts or agreements with Microsoft already, where you can port those licenses in, or you may have some Azure service credits due to you as well.
That's awesome. I think we caught most of the questions there. We're over time a little bit, but again, we covered a lot of great information. So just want to say thank you to everyone who came out to the session today. A lot of you were asking about if this session was being recorded, and yes, it will be recorded, and I'm sure our marketing team will be sending you out a link with a reference to it. All right, so thanks again, and have a great day.
Happy Friday.